This module is an introduction to the semantics of adjectives. So what we do is we take a look at what contribution is made, what the semantic contribution is that's made by adjectives. We look at different classes of adjectives and see how they work differently in the way they modify other expressions. Now note that adjectives are typically defined as expressions that alter the meaning of nouns to express a finer gradation of meaning than the noun alone can express. Adjectives have two main semantic and syntactic characteristics. Semantically, they introduce properties, and syntactically, they are modifiers which can occur recursively. When combined with nouns, the result is a new property. This is the simple picture. There are many interesting and important complexities in the meaning and composition of adjectives with nouns. What constitutes the grammatical category of an adjective is not easy to determine. Various distributional tests are used for this, but they neither apply uniformly across languages, nor do all those categorized as adjectives pass all these tests uniformly. One distributional property of adjectives is that they can be used predicatively, supplying the main predicate in a sentence. So when you say Kumbhakarna is fat, the adjective fat is the main predicate in the sentence. In English, mostly adjectives can be complements of epistemic verbs like seem and appear, though in some contexts, a noun can also be a complement. Suppose I say, Kumbhakarna appears fat, Kumbhakarna seems fat, Kumbhakarna seems a fool. In the first two cases, it's the adjective that appears as the complement. In the last case, a noun phrase appears as the complement. Only adjectives directly compose with degree intensifiers like too, very, so. If you say Ravana is too, so, or very dependent on Kumbhakarna, you get good sentences. But it's ungrammatical to say Ravana is too, so, very depends on Kumbhakarna. Ravana has too, so, very dependence on Kumbhakarna. Okay? So these cannot combine with verbs, these cannot combine with nouns, but they can with adjectives. The most characteristic distribution of adjectives is in attributive modification, where they can occur recursively. You can say fair Kumbhakarna, you can say stout fair Kumbhakarna, you can say tall stout fair Kumbhakarna. So adjectives can be stacked. Though this is a sufficient condition for calling something an adjective, this is not a necessary condition. Some adjectives can occur predicatively, but not attributively. These are words like asleep, alone, awake, and so on. So you can say Kumbhakarna is asleep, but you cannot say asleep Kumbhakarna is snoring a lot. Further, there are restrictions on the ordering of adjectives in attributive positions. There are numerous inefficient Italian chariots on our road is good, but it's ungrammatical to say there are inefficient numerous Italian chariots on our road. It's also ungrammatical to say there are inefficient Italian numerous chariots on our road. Differences in the order and position of the adjectives in the attributive position change the interpretation. The invisible visible stars include Sirius. The visible invisible stars include Sirius is somewhat strange. The first sentence means one of the stars that are visible to the eye but are currently invisible, say because of cloud, is Sirius. The second sentence refers to the stars that are intrinsically invisible but currently visible, a contradictory proposition. This shows us that the inherent versus temporary properties, or individual level versus stage level properties, are sensitive to the placement in the sentence. The semantic classification of adjectives. The basic typology of adjectives has its roots in early formal semantics. You can look up works by Montague, Parsons, and in a later version, you can look at the work by Camp and Partey in a paper in 1995. They discuss in detail the semantics of a large class of large classes of adjectives. Adjectives can be semantically classified into three main types: intersective adjectives, subsective adjectives, and privative adjectives. This classification comes from a recent article by Partey 2009. Intersective adjectives. These are the simplest kind of adjectives in terms of semantic analysis. The adjective noun are in a symmetric relation and give rise to straightforward entailments. The sentence below has the following entailments. Kumbhakarna is a loyal Rakshasa. Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa, Kumbhakarna is loyal. The phrase loyal Rakshasa is a complex predicate formed from two simpler predicates, loyal and Rakshasa, which are independent of each other. Together, they derive the truth conditions that Kumbhakarna is a loyal Rakshasa. That is, if and only if Kumbhakarna is loyal and Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa. For Kumbhakarna to be a loyal Rakshasa, he must be a member of two sets, the set of Rakshasas and the set of the loyal, basically an intersection of the two properties, loyal and Rakshasa. Hence the term intersective adjectives. Treating both the predicates as simple properties of the extensional type yields the interpretation below. The interpretation, the denotation of loyal Rakshasa is simply equal to lambda x. X is loyal and X is a Rakshasa. How do two properties come together to form a predicate? Neither one can saturate the other. A completely new process of semantic combination called predicate modification, here following Hyman-Kratzer 1998, is at work here. So we say that if X is a branching node and has two daughters Y and Z, if both Y and Z are in the domain of things of the term ET, then the interpretation of X equals lambda X such that Y applied to X equals T and Z applied to X equals T. The above formula says that the properties associated by Y and Z are combined to yield the property an individual has if and only if it satisfies both of them. The rule of PM derives the right truth conditional semantics, conditional statements for the following. Kumbhakarna is a hungry Rakshasa is true if and only if Kumbhakarna is hungry and Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa. Kumbhakarna is a married Rakshasa is true if and only if Kumbhakarna is married and Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa. Kumbhakarna is a dead Rakshasa is true if and only if Kumbhakarna is dead and Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa. Intersective interpretations create flat semantic representations without any scopal effects. So the denotation of X in these cases is lambda X, Y of X, and Z of X and W of X. The same thing means the same thing if you change the order of X, of Y, Z, W, and so on. Subsective adjectives. Okay, so we just saw examples of intersective adjectives. They have a relatively simple semantics. The next level of complexity is what you find with adjectives that are called subsective. Intersective adjective, they maintain a truth conditional independence from the noun. Its contribution to them stands regardless of what the noun is. So replacing the noun with another that also characterizes the individual can still make the sentence hold true. Suppose I said Kumbhakarna is a loyal Rakshasa, Kumbhakarna is a fighter, and Kumbhakarna is a loyal fighter. Okay. Essentially, the thing is that if anytime the semantic value of Rakshasa and the semantic value of fighter are identical, the truth value of the sentence Kumbhakarna is a loyal Rakshasa will invariably be the same as the truth value of Kumbhakarna is a loyal fighter. Okay. This is because the semantic value of loyal does not in any way depend on the semantic value of the noun that it attaches to. But this is not true of all adjectives. So the following adjectives, for example, do not allow the above kind of substitution. Suppose I say Kumbhakarna is a good or lousy or experienced or typical Rakshasa. Kumbhakarna is a fighter. Kumbhakarna is a good, lousy, experienced, typical fighter. You can see that in these cases, you cannot substitute fighter for Rakshasa, salva veritate, even if Rakshasa and fighter have the same semantic value. And the reason the substitution fails in these sentences is because what the adjective describes is not independent of the noun. An individual who's a typical Rakshasa does acts that are normal or standard for a Rakshasa, whereas a typical fighter has qualities of a normal or average fighter. The property that the adjective denotes seems to change with the noun. A characterization of this in terms of set theory is as follows. The semantic value of a loyal Rakshasa is a subset of the semantic value of a Rakshasa. A semantic value of a loyal fighter is a subset of the semantic value of a loyal fighter. The semantic value of a good Rakshasa is a subset of the semantic value of a Rakshasa. A semantic value of a good fighter is a subset of the semantic value of a fighter. Because the adjective noun combinations like these describe a subset of individuals denoted by the noun alone, these are called subsective adjectives. Some adjectives are ambiguous between an intersective and a subsective reading. A well-known example is the following. Shurpanakha is a beautiful dancer. This sentence can have one of two interpretations. Shurpanakha is beautiful and a dancer, in which case it's a subset of Shurpanakha dances beautifully. So it is possible to negate one of the readings while affirming the other. Shurpanakha is a beautiful dancer, but she is not beautiful. The kind of noun that these adjectives combine with also determines whether ambiguity arises or not. The beautiful sunrise isn't beautiful. This sentence only has a subsective reading because the noun sunset doesn't support an intersective interpretation. There are some subsective adjectives that are somewhat like intersective adjectives. An important consideration to keep in mind is that some intersective adjectives show seemingly subsective behavior. For example, the truth conditions for Kumbhakarna is a short Rakshasa are not the same as Kumbhakarna is short and Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa. If Kumbhakarna is 10 feet tall and the average height for Rakshasas is 15 feet, he is a short Rakshasa, but Kumbhakarna is tall by human standards. So what counts as short depends on the context or comparison class. When short is combined with Rakshasa, the comparison is restricted to only other Rakshasas. In intersective modification, on the other hand, The comparison is with any relevant set, not just Rakshasas, as in the sentence, Shurpanakha is a dead Rakshasa. In set theoretic terms, we can represent this as a short Rakshasa is a subset of the set of Rakshasas, or and so on. We can be tempted to conclude that these are actually subsective adjectives and not intersective, just like some semanticists. But current theoretical analyses, for example, Kamp and Party 1995, Kennedy 2007, put them in the intersective class, but with some special refinements. These kinds of modifiers are called vague and are still intersective, but like a contextually supplied set as their argument, which is determined usually by the noun. Compositionally, this works as follows. A short elephant is lambda x, and such that x is an elephant and x is short for some comparison class. Here C refers to the comparison class. As the value for C in most cases is determined by the noun, it seems subsective. For genuine subsective adjectives, adding a comparison class still does not give the right interpretation. Setting the standard of beauty is appropriate to dancers still does not give the right truth conditions of someone who dances beautifully. The following adjectives are neither subsective nor intersective. So take a look at a few. These are what you might call the non-subsective, non-intersective adjectives. These are sometimes called plain or modal non-subsective adjectives. Suppose I say Kumbhakarna is a likely, probable, potential, or alleged snorer. An intersective reading is just not possible. Kumbhakarna is a likely snorer, for example, does not entail Kumbhakarna is likely, nor does it entail that Kumbhakarna is a snorer. This means a subsective reading is not possible either, which means a likely snorer is not a subset of either likely or snorer. For one set of adjectives, there is a more striking effect. Kumbhakarna is a fake or pretend or fictitious or artificial Rakshasa. They imply exclusion from the noun meaning, as shown in the following. Kumbhakarna is a fake Rakshasa. Entails Kumbhakarna is fake. But it does not entail Kumbhakarna is a Rakshasa. In fact, it entails Kumbhakarna is not a Rakshasa. These are often called privative adjectives. In set theoretic terms, fake Rakshasa is not a subset of a Rakshasa. In fact, the intersection between fake Rakshasa and the Rakshasa is the empty set. What do we say overall about the interpretation of adjectives? As we saw above, the simplest analysis for intersective adjectives is that they have a low type, that is, of properties et in predicate structures. They simply compose by predicate saturation. In attributive structures, they are interpreted via the special rule of predicate modification. What about non-subsective adjectives? An adjective like alleged is analyzed as a function that applies to the meaning of the noun that it composes with. Since it is also a modal, it needs an intentional semantics. This is shown below. Okay. The denotation of alleged applies to this. It quantifies over the set of words compatible with what has been alleged in the evaluation world W, such that in all such worlds, the individual is a snorer. Thus, it is a higher type denoting a function from noun meaning to noun meaning of the type est called predicate modifier. For the sake of uniformity, some analyses consider an intersective adjective as not a predicate but also a predicate modifier. Okay. This is given in the formula that you just see. What about subsective adjectives? Given the parsimony of adjective type homogeneity, subsective adjectives are treated not as simple predicates but as second-order predicates which can only be saturated by another predicate. For example, skillful can be predicate relativized to another predicate like this. Lambda p, lambda x, lambda w, skillful p is p, skillful as rakshasa. These what you eventually get is something like Kumbhakarna is skillful as a rakshasa. If they're uniformly modificational by itself, the meaning of these adjectives can't function as the main predicate of the sentence, as it can only be saturated by a property, not by an individual or an entity. But they can occur in predicative positions. So you can say things like Kumbhakarna is skillful. The solution that many semanticists go for here is that there is an unpronounced an unpronounced noun in these sentences, even a semantically bleached noun like entity or one. What about adjectives with subsective as well as intersective readings? For adjectives with both subsective and intersective readings, Larson 1998 proposes an analysis which leverages on the nature of the noun that is modified. Nouns like dancer are analyzed as being ambiguous between properties of individuals, properties of events, and individuals. When an adjective like beautiful modifies a noun, it also inherits the ambiguity between properties of events and individuals based on whether it takes the event argument to saturate it or the individual argument. That's what you see in the formula given there. In the first interpretation, the adjective thus has an adverbial modification analysis. The last class of adjectives are what we call gradable adjectives. As we saw earlier, intersective adjectives which are subsective-like, the gradable adjectives are interpreted as denoting the property of a property and have a threshold or standard that an individual must reach to have that property. And the standard is determined by the comparison class which comes from the noun. So an adjective like tall gets the following denotation. Lambda p, lambda x, that x is a height, and there's a standard height for the property p that we have written like this. Here, stnd picks out an appropriate value from the set of height that are got by applying the height function to the individuals in the denotation of the noun. This follows Klein 1980. So tall takes a property and then means taller than the average p. So tall Rakshasa is a function that takes an entity x and returns true if and only if x is a Rakshasa and x is above the average height for a Rakshasa. But gradable adjectives also have the property of occurring with degree modifiers and in comparatives. Kumbhakarna is 10 feet tall. You can say Kumbhakarna is taller than Shurpanakha. Kumbhakarna is 2, so very tall. To explain these facts, semanticists have proposed that gradable adjectives are not just properties of properties, but rather relations between more abstract representations of measurements like degrees or intervals and properties. On this view, the denotation of tall looks like the following. The formula there, you see that there is an argument for a degree variable d. The function of the expression that combines with the gradable adjective then determines the value of the degree argument, thus providing a threshold of comparison and turning the adjective into a property that holds of an individual if its height exceeds the contextual standard. But now, where the gradable adjective is modified by a degree predicate, needs to be saturated by a degree since the gradable adjective is looking for a degree. And there is no constituent that can overly saturate the degree argument. A standard solution is to posit a phonological null positive degree morpheme, which achieves this by existentially binding the degree argument and providing the restriction that comes from a degree on the scale above a certain threshold. This complex semantic analysis of gradable adjectives thus accounts for the subjectivity of these adjectives without positing a property of function. But instead of denoting properties, the gradable adjectives denote relations between individuals, and scalar values called degrees, and only by composition with something that saturates their degree argument, they become properties.